Irma moves on, and more deaths are reported as the White House announces the president will travel to survey the damage. New sanctions. The United Nations imposes measures on North Korea after its strongest nuclear test explosion. Catholic outrage.
The dogma lives loudly within you.
Fallout from Senator Dianne Feinstein's remark to a Catholic judicial nominee, where the video is being used now. He's free.
I am Father Tommy George, Father Tom from India.
A report from Rome after the release of Father Tom, kidnapped for more than a year in Yemen. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, September 12th, 2017. Residents are heading back to the Florida Keys to survey damage. It comes as air service in Miami and Fort Lauderdale resumes on a limited basis. Thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Irma has been downgraded to a tropical depression. The storm is blamed for at least 7 deaths in Florida, 3 in South Carolina, and 2 here in Georgia. Irma flooded major cities and left millions without power. The federal government says it faces a long and challenging road ahead.
Our federal, state, tribal, and local partners will continue to stand with the people affected by the storm.
President Trump says Irma's victims are getting the full resources of the federal government. The White House says the president will visit Florida on Thursday. North Korea rejects a new UN Security Council resolution imposing tougher sanctions on the communist regime. In response, a top envoy lashes out at the United States.
The DPRK will no longer be onlooker and make sure that U.S. pays due price.
Ambassador Han Tae-sung saying they denounce Washington's evil intention. His comments in Geneva today come as North Korea faces criticism of its weapons tests. The Security Council unanimously approved sanctions last night, banning the reclusive regime from importing all natural gas liquids and caps its imports of crude oil. Joining us now is Congressman Mike Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin. He served for 7 years in the United States Marine Corps and deployed twice to Iraq and a PhD in international relations. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me again.
You're so welcome. Tell me what you think about the latest UN sanctions.
Well, I think it's a positive step forward. I'm glad the vote was unanimous. I know that we wanted to go a bit further, but at the end of the day, I think there's a lot more we can be doing in order to impose maximum economic pressure on not only the North Koreans, but on anyone who supports them. Most notably, we have to be willing to put secondary sanctions on Chinese businesses and banks. 90% of North Korea's economy is dependent on trade with China. And if we want our economic campaign to have any effect, we have to be willing to go further. At the same time, we continue to bolster our defenses with our allies, whether it's expediting the deployment of the THAAD missile battery to South Korea, enhancing our presence in the region with our naval assets we have there, which is why it's so troubling that we now have 2 Navy destroyers that are out of commission after the tragic accidents, the collisions for the USS McCain and the Fitzgerald. And it just goes to show how important it is to have a robust, strong, forward-deployed military precisely to give us options to avoid war at a time like this.
Will we go to war if North Korea continues to launch test missiles?
Well, I think we have to be willing to take whatever steps are necessary in order to protect our own homeland and our own security. But the essence of deterrence, which is all about avoiding war, requires you to convince the other guy that you are willing to do whatever is necessary. That's why I'm glad that the president and his advisors have said repeatedly that all options remain on the table. And at the same time, we are working with our allies to bolster our defenses. We're working with our allies to increase the economic pressure on North Korea. I think we should also be willing to consider steps such as shooting down the next missile that they fire, particularly if it threatens our allies, like it did with their latest test over Japan's airspace, taking further steps in order to undermine the regime as well. And that, I think, gives us our best chance to resolve this crisis peacefully. We have to show strength in order to avoid war.
I have to ask you, though, is the U.S. adequately equipped for war?
I think at the end of the day, we bring enormous firepower, not only ourselves unilaterally, but we have an alliance system unlike anything the world has ever seen. And so while over the last 6 years in particular, we have done enormous damage to our own military through defense sequester and through neglecting the first and foremost function of the federal government, we still have assets that we can bring to bear on this problem that no other country can hope to equal. But unless we want crises like this to get worse, and unless we want dictators and rogue regimes to test our limits, we need to dedicate ourselves now to the task of rebuilding and modernizing the military. As Secretary Mattis said, sequester has done more damage to our military than any enemy in the field could have hoped to do. And that's what peace through strength is all about. It's about giving our commanders options short of war to resolve crises like this peacefully.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin.
Thanks for having me.
North Korea is just one of the many issues world leaders will address this week as they are gathering for the UN General Assembly in New York City. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee was there yesterday, spoke with the Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations.
Lauren, Archbishop Bernardito Auza tells me prayer is vital this week as the General Assembly kicks off. For that reason, the Holy See ambassador hosted a prayer service. It's all an effort to support the important work ahead. Catholics and people of all faiths gather at the Church of the Holy Family in Manhattan, just a block away from the United Nations. Archbishop Auza, who presided, says for 3 decades this parish has hosted UN officials before they debate global policy.
We are happy to have this occasion as a reminder in a very different setting, not in a debating hall, but in a church, to be reminded of all these fundamental challenges that we face this year.
The Archbishop offered 3 prayers inspired by Pope Francis, one for migrants and refugees, one for the environment, and one for world peace. Bishop John Barris from the Diocese of Rockville Center on Long Island says peace starts at home.
The architecture of world peace is grounded on the architecture of peace within our families, our domestic churches. It's the role of the family to be a leaven of peacemaking in extended families, in parishes and in neighborhoods, and globally.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, a Catholic himself, spoke at the service, urging solidarity and dialogue.
God of truth and love.
For Father Gerald Murray, Holy Family's pastor, that dialogue could begin at his parish, in the heart of Manhattan.
I think we offer a living witness because many of the delegates, in order to get to the UN complex, they walk across 47th Street where the church is, they walk right by the church. So the church really is, the building itself is an evangelical tool to remind people that there is someone higher than themselves.
The Holy See says its goal is to promote the dignity of the human person at the United Nations. Some of the specific issues include protecting the family, migrants, and religious freedom. Lauren?
Very good piece, Wyatt. Thank you. President Donald Trump welcomes Malaysia's Prime Minister to the White House today. The 2 leaders are discussing security and counterterrorism, among other topics. Many, though, are critical of this meeting. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump thanked Prime Minister Najib Razak for investments Malaysia has made in the United States and for its role in fighting ISIS. But Razak's visit is controversial. Human rights experts say his government persecutes religious minorities, and that needs to be on the agenda today.
All smiles as President Trump greets his Malaysian counterpart.
It's great to have the Prime Minister of Malaysia.
The president pointing to a $1 billion trade deal with Boeing and praising Najib Razak's position on terror.
He's been very, very strong on terrorism in Malaysia and a great supporter from that standpoint. So that's a very important thing to the United States.
But Trump made no mention of a massive corruption scandal involving the prime minister or the persecution of religious minorities in his Muslim-majority country.
It's incredibly important that the president address the various human rights concerns and the important human rights concerns that are taking place in Malaysia right now.
David McKean is a human rights expert who specializes in Asia.
Strongly urge the president to press the Prime Minister on issues of religious persecution, including the persecution of Christians and any other religious minority in the country.
Back in Malaysia, political rivals of the Prime Minister agree. In a Washington Post op-ed today, a member of the Malaysian Parliament says his country faces a desperate situation, and what should top President Trump's agenda is the hatred and fear fueled by Najib's own party's support of extremist groups that routinely harass and frighten the country's significant Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu minorities.
The U.S. Department of Justice is investigating the Malaysian Prime Minister amid allegations of a global embezzlement and money laundering scheme, but White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said she's not aware if that came up in today's meeting. Lauren.
Mark, what is the Catholic population in Malaysia?
Out of a population of 31 million, Catholics number approximately 1.1 million, including 190 parishes and around 270 priests. American Archbishop Joseph Marino is the Vatican's ambassador to Malaysia, and Pope Francis just received the first ambassador of Malaysia to the Holy See last year.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. Hope Hicks is named permanent White House Communications Director. She had been interim director after the departure of Anthony Scaramucci. The 28-year-old is a longtime aide to President Trump and was one of the first staffers to join his presidential campaign. Cardinal Timothy Dolan takes heat from both sides of the political aisle. He continues to defend his stance on immigration, even though it was recently condemned by a former presidential advisor.
Give us wisdom.
He's accustomed to being a high-profile target, like when he prayed at President Trump's inauguration.
For we are your servants.
In an exclusive interview with His Eminence, he told News Nightly in New York he faces criticism from all sides.
So I get blasted for saying the prayer at Trump's Our Nation inauguration. You get blasted being with de Blasio for defending the Dreamers.
His vehement support provoked criticism this weekend from former chief White House strategist Steve Bannon.
The Catholic Church has been terrible about this. The bishops have been terrible about this. They need illegal aliens. They need illegal aliens to fill the churches.
The cardinal responded forcefully, penning an op-ed in the Daily News saying to suggest that we are doing it to increase our numbers or revenue is both preposterous and rude. Dolan told me, despite what his detractors say, he is a consistent advocate for Catholic social teaching.
We don't really care if we're standing with conservatives or liberals, Republicans or Democrats, Trump or Schumer. If it's human life, if it's the dignity of the human person, we'll be there. They don't get that. They think it's politics.
For the Archbishop of New York, being a lightning rod comes with the territory. Cardinal Dolan does not shy away from the media or from Twitter. You can hear more from him on his weekly show on the Catholic channel on SiriusXM. The White House distances itself from Steve Bannon's comments about immigration in the Catholic Church. An administration spokesperson tells our correspondent Mark Irons that Bannon was only representing his personal views. Hurricane Irma didn't just impact Florida, it also devastated several islands in the Caribbean and killed at least 35 people. In Cuba, the storm left hundreds homeless. More than 100 homes in a small town on the nation's coastline were destroyed. Cuban authorities promised those displaced by the storm would receive new homes. French President Emmanuel Macron visits the French islands of Guadeloupe. St. Martin and St. Bart's were also ravaged in the hurricane. French island territories have reported looting and violence after the storm that left 60% of homes in St. Martin uninhabitable. Macron vows to double military and police forces to bolster security. Father Tom Uzunanil, an Indian priest, has been freed after 18 months in captivity.
To help me get released and thus to save my life.
Father Tom was kidnapped in March 2016 in Yemen. In a statement, the Vatican says the Holy See fervently thanks all of those who worked for his release. Juliet Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's new Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome. Juliet, tell us about the circumstances surrounding Father Tom's abduction and what we know about his release.
Father Tom is a Salesian priest who was working as a chaplain at a home for elderly people in the southern Yemeni city of Aden when armed militants broke into the center. They destroyed the chapel, they destroyed the center, and they killed 16 people, including 4 nuns, and took Father Tom hostage, and he was held for 18 months. The good news now is that he has been released. Yemeni government confirmed that. That is the good news, and he is also in good health, reportedly, and apparently he is being flown to Rome for medical checks.
During his abduction, I remember that he used social media to call for help. What did he say? We have that terrible picture of him.
Yes, immediately after he was taken hostage, Pope Francis denounced the attack as a diabolical act of violence. And soon after, a video appeared on YouTube in which the priest appealed for his release. And he did make a point of saying that he believed that his nationality, the fact that he was Indian, was sort of a detractor, and that his being held hostage wasn't taken as seriously because he was not a European priest. And he indicated that he believed that he would be taken more seriously had he been European. But good news, he has been released now.
The Pope is very sensitive, Juliet, to the persecution of religious minorities all around the world. How has he been showing his concern?
The Pope, in 2 months' time, is due to make another apostolic trip. He's just back from visiting Colombia for 5 days, as we know, and he is due to visit Myanmar and Bangladesh. Now, hundreds of thousands of Muslim Rohingya in Myanmar have been fleeing religious persecution. They've been fleeing to neighboring Bangladesh, where they have been taken in, but the 2 refugee camps, the 2 official refugee camps where the refugees stay, are full. And in fact, today, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh made an appeal to Yangon, asking that the refugees be taken back. In neighboring India, the Pope is not slated to visit India in this upcoming trip. However, Vatican insiders do say that probably he will make a trip there in the not too distant future, where Christian minorities have been persecuted increasingly in recent times.
Thank you so much for your insight. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly's new Vatican correspondent.
Thank you.
Coming up, fallout from a senator's statement.
That's of concern.
Our Jason Calvi has an update after Senator Dianne Feinstein questions a judicial nominee about her faith. Plus, President Trump's relationship with the GOP and other news of the day with The Hill's Bob Cusack. Uproar grows over Senator Dianne Feinstein's criticism of a Catholic judicial nominee. Scholars, university presidents, major newspaper editors all across the country slam the California Democrat. But at least one Republican is defending her. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi broke this story last week and joins us now with more on the fallout. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. My tweet and the video of the original exchange are now part of a Senate campaign. The question of a religious test for judicial nominees is at the heart of this controversy. Today, I caught up with some of the principal players.
The dogma lives loudly within you, and that's of concern.
Senator Dianne Feinstein's words still ricochet tonight. Columns in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal criticize her. We again give the California Democrat a chance to respond.
Who's done it? I can tell you that. I don't want to press the case here.
Okay. So no thoughts right now, Senator?
Oh, I have thoughts, but I'm not going to express them. Thank you, though.
Thanks.
President Trump nominated Amy Barrett to be an appeals court judge. Feinstein was one of the senators who questioned the Catholic mother of 7 and Notre Dame law professor during her confirmation hearing last week. Notre Dame's president, Father John Jenkins, writes Senator Feinstein, "I am one in whose heart dogma lives loudly, as it has for centuries in the lives of many Americans." And Princeton's president, a constitutional scholar, also writes Feinstein, saying her questions about faith were not consistent with the principles set forth in the Constitution's no religious test clause. And an Indiana Republican Senate candidate is now using my original tweet and video to challenge the Democratic incumbent, Senator Joe Donnelly. So we asked Donnelly, a Notre Dame grad. Really quick thoughts on the Amy Barrett hearing last week and the questions on her faith. I know you're...
Just give my office a call.
Would you be able to comment on that, Senator? Was it inappropriate, Senator? Neither Donnelly nor his office answered our questions, but one Republican defends Feinstein.
Being a federal judge is a big deal. It's for life. He or she has enormous power. So I'm not going to criticize a colleague for asking probing questions.
Senator Kennedy tells me he liked Amy Barrett's answer to the faith questions. He says he plans to support her when the Judiciary Committee votes on her nomination. Lauren, we're expecting that vote in several weeks.
Has Senator Feinstein offered any other explanation about her comments? I saw you trying to get her on the record earlier.
Yeah, we did speak with her. We stopped with her several times since this happened last week. And earlier she told me she was worried, really, about the kind of judge that Barrett would be.
Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thank you, Jason. The president is hosting a bipartisan dinner with senators tonight, including Democratic senators Manchin of West Virginia, Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, Joe Donnelly of Indiana are going to be there, along with Republican Senators John Thune of South Dakota, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, and Orrin Hatch of Utah. Here to discuss the meeting is Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief for The Hill. Welcome back.
Hey, Lauren.
He sided with Democrats last week, the president did, on the debt ceiling and on funding the government. How awkward is this going to be for him to have to face these Republicans? What's the menu going to be tonight?
It's going to be, well, the menu is definitely bipartisanship, and we have not seen a lot of that, as you mentioned, this year. But maybe this is part of a trend. Heidi Heitkamp, he flew on Air Force One earlier this month. She'll be at the dinner. Manchin, Donnelly, all of them are red state Democrats who are up for re-election in 2018, and he wants their votes specifically for tax reform.
And will that happen?
It remains to be seen. Heitkamp has said, I want to see the bill. Of course, we haven't seen the bill yet. But they don't need, if they're able to pass tax reform, they can pass it like health care. Just get a majority. Don't need 60 votes. However, there could be Republican defections. So therefore, they would need these more conservative Democrats. And I think it's smart politically to woo them.
As we reported earlier in the newscast, the president met with the Malaysian Prime Minister at the White House today. And it was controversial, but he also, the Prime Minister penned an op-ed for your publication. Let's take a look at something he said. Rest assured, Malaysia will always stand shoulder to shoulder with America on this vital mission to eliminate a terror group whose acts sicken all of civilized humanity. Is it enough that he's fighting ISIS? How significant is the relationship between U.S. and Malaysia when it comes to human rights violations?
Well, it's significant enough for the White House, and their top priorities are ISIS and North Korea, and they have an ally in Malaysia, and that's what the op-ed basically spelled out. I'm on your side, President Trump. However, controversial figure with human rights activists, but for Trump, it's all about the top issues, and North Korea and ISIS are far more important to him right now than concern within his own country in Malaysia about human rights abuses alleged.
And Christian persecution.
Exactly.
All right, thank you so much. Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief for The Hill.
Thanks, Lauren.
Up next, denied disaster relief grants. Churches in Texas file a lawsuit after Hurricane Harvey's devastation. How the president is responding. And a woman says the Pope saved her life during his recent visit to Colombia. We'll tell you her story. A woman attacked with acid 17 years ago says Pope Francis saved her life during his recent trip to Colombia. The Daily Mail reports Consuela Cordoba wanted to end her life by injection. Her former partner thrown acid in her face. Now she lives in a mesh suit and needs tubes in her nostrils to breathe. She went to the Pope and asked for his blessing. You're seeing cell phone video of the exchange. The Holy Father refused and told her she was very brave and pretty. And now she says, I want to live. The Knights of Columbus says that organization has raised $1.3 million to help the victims of hurricanes Harvey and Irma. The Knights are also volunteering in areas devastated by the storm. We thank the Knights for their support of this program. As residents clean up after Harvey, the city of Houston may increase property taxes by 9% to help pay for damages. And it is controversial. It comes as some churches are filing a lawsuit against FEMA, claiming they have been denied disaster relief grants due to their religious status. Harvey caused billions of dollars in damage in and around Houston. The lawsuit names several non-Catholic churches asking for relief help. And the president, in response, tweeted, churches in Texas should be entitled to reimbursement from FEMA relief funds for helping victims of Hurricane Harvey, just like others. Our news partners have more specifics on that lawsuit. You can read it now at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Blessed are those who snuggle and spoil, brag and boast, for they shall be called, everybody, grandparents. And now number 9 is here. The president's son Eric and his wife Laura welcomed Eric Luke today, the 9th grandchild for President Trump. Eric Trump, along with his brother Don Jr., have remained in New York to run the family business. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.